So we begin in Sudan, where there has been heavy artillery shelling and gunfire in the capital, Khartoum, after a shaky ceasefire collapsed. Earlier, the United States and Saudi Arabia suspended talks between the army and rapid support forces. The talks in Jeddah were meant to negotiate the safe delivery of humanitarian aid, but the warring sides have violated the ceasefire agreement. Washington also sanctioned companies linked to both sides of this conflict. Meanwhile, the World Food Programme says that one of its warehouses has been under attack. Armed men looted the facility containing tens of thousands of tons of food and supplements in El Obeid, that's in south-central Sudan. This is one of the largest logistic hubs of the UN agency in Africa. The World Food Programme says it will put more than 4 million people caught in conflicts at risk. Hiba Morgan is in Omdurman, across the Nile River from Khartoum. Hiba, do we know who is stealing this food that civilians will so badly need?
Well, we spoke to residents in El Obeid, and we spoke to some senior UN officials here in the capital, Khartoum, and or rather in Sudan, because most of the UN staff have moved to the eastern city of Port Sudan. So those who we spoke to accused the rapid support forces of being behind the looting of the warehouse in El Obeid that led to at least 20,000 metric tons of food being looted. Now, they also said that civilians who were also in need of food were also did participate in the looting of the warehouse in North Kordofan. But it's worth noting that it is not the only robbery that the World Food Programme faced since the start of the conflict. Tens of thousands of metric tons have been robbed from their warehouses in the western part of the capital in the Darfur region. Their warehouses here in the capital, Khartoum, have also been looted, along with warehouses belonging to other organizations. Their offices have been vandalized, properties have been destroyed. All of that affecting the aid operations here, where millions of people still remain trapped in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. Now, the looting and the fighting is making it very hard for humanitarian agencies to work to deliver food supplies to those who need it here in the capital. So there are concerns that the ongoing looting and the hampering of operations due to the violence will affect those here in the capital, Khartoum, who are in need of assistance.
Hiba, tell us about those sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on both sides of this conflict, the Army and the RSF. Do you expect that to change the course of this conflict?
Well, first of all, let's look at the companies that have been sanctioned. You have two companies that are affiliated to the Rapid Support Forces and are responsible for getting them weapons and the technicals that are currently driving around the capital, Khartoum, in the military operations of the Rapid Support Forces. One of them based here in the capital, Khartoum, another based in the United Arab Emirates. Now, these companies are responsible, I would say, for getting in the vehicles that the RSF have been driving around the capital, Khartoum, for their weapons and also for their economic investments, including the gold trade. So those are the companies that have been targeted by the United States when it comes to the RSF. When it comes to the Army, their companies targeted include companies that manufacture ammunition, weapons, cars, basically everything that the armed forces would need. And the whole purpose is for the two sides to have less fighting capabilities to reduce the conflict, or rather make sure that it does not last as long as possible. But for it to have an impact would take time that many people here say they cannot afford, as many remain trapped between the fighting of the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army.
Hiba, thank you very much for that reporting from Omdurman, just across the river from Khartoum. Let's bring in Abdul-Karam Elgoni. He is chairman and researcher at Sidra Institute for Strategic Studies. He joins us via Skype now from Johannesburg in South Africa. How do you think both sides sort of feel about these U.S. sanctions? Do they fear them, or are they confident, do you think, they can get around them for now? Okay. I'm going to assume that probably you didn't hear the question the first time. Sir, how do you think both sides of the fighting, Mr. Abdul-Karam Elgoni, feel about these sanctions?
I think the two parties, thank you for having me. I think the two parties, they don't take it seriously. They don't see the impact on it immediately, and they won't abide by it. It is not a heavy stick enough to make any of them be concerned. because I think they were expecting it, and they made their preparations to avoid its impact as long as possible. So I don't think the said sanctions will make a big difference to this war.
Do they fear further waves of sanctions? Because, you know, that's what we usually see in these conflicts, especially with the U.S. You know, sanctions are step one to try and incentivize the belligerents to scale down the fighting. And then when that doesn't work, often there's a step two, a step three, and the sanctions get harder.
That is exactly what most of the people are looking for and waiting for. They think that this is not enough. As you know, Saudi Arabia and the United States have both started with the carrot. When Saudi Arabia said, I am giving 100 million for the rehabilitation and the humanitarian services, and the United States said we are giving 245 million. So they started with the carrot, but the carrot did not make any impact, so they started with this phase, and we look forward to an additional sanctions that can make a difference. But I think before that, they could have tried to create some sort of mission that will be guaranteed access by both the army and the rapid support forces to areas where they are in control of. And this might pave the way for the acceptance of both. To me, I feel very, very clearly that the army is feeling a bit embarrassed because the symbols of authority are in the hands of the RSF. And if they stopped the war and people knew where the army is standing and where the RSF is standing, it becomes embarrassing for the army, which have 100 years of existence, which has 85% of the GDP of the Sudan, and its leaders are talking toughly in the previous weeks and months and years that they are capable of keeping Sudan and things like this, and suddenly they surrender even their headquarters to a support army that they call a militia. It's very embarrassing. So I
if
feel
I could
if
just
we
jump
don't
in,
have a heavy stick, they won't stop.
Are you telling us that the RSF is currently winning the war, at least on a military level?
You see, there are two wars in Sudan. There is a war in the capital, Khartoum, and there is the war in the remainder of Khartoum. I am, for example, personally, I am from an area called West Kordofan State. In West Kordofan State, the community there stood up in the first week and brought together the army and the rapid support forces in the town, because there were two of them in the town, the capital of the state. And they said to them, please, we don't want both of you to fight here, because if you fight, it is we who are going to suffer. So please have peace between you and let us wait for what happens in Khartoum. If what happens in Khartoum, the army's hand is the upper hand, we follow what happens in Khartoum. If the RSF is the upper hand, we follow what is happening in Khartoum. But we should not fight between us here. And this is what has happened in most of the capitals of the 14 states in Sudan. The problem now is Khartoum. And in Khartoum, the one who have the bigger share that people see in the streets in front of their houses in control is RSF. Everyone is saying that.
Dr. Abdul-Karam.
Including the army itself. The army itself is saying we are not in hold of Khartoum state, but we are in hold of the other states of Sudan.
Abdul-Karam Elgoni, thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you.